You are listening to the Practicing the Art of Small Business podcast with Shannyn Merlo and Julie Parker. Enjoy this conversation about business, leadership, and the self-awareness journey to great success.
Hello, Julie. Hello, listeners. Welcome to episode number 34, Julie, of Practicing the Art of Small Business.
Hey, Shannyn, and hey, viewers as well, for those lucky people that get to watch us on YouTube.
On the tubes. On the tubes. We are far more interactive and exciting on the tubes than on, what do we call ourselves? Spotify? Spotify. Oh, wow.
Just a podcast, really, just saying it's a podcast. But, yeah, we like to think that we're more entertaining to watch as well, but that's us. We're quite biased towards our own brilliance, and so not everyone's going to agree. But what's going to be our topic today, Shannyn?
Well, Julie, I've been thinking a lot about behaviour and how do we affect behaviour, especially when we're talking about leadership and creating high-performing teams. And so I thought we could talk about two things, one which is one of your favourite kind of underlying concepts, and one which I came across in my research of behaviour, and I thought that we could bring those to light. And so your one, do you want to tell us about your one, and then I can tell us about my one?
I'll show you mine, and then you show me yours, Shannyn. It feels like I'm a little person, 8 years old. When was the first time that I saw somebody's thing? Oh, okay, a long time ago, long time ago.
And now this is why you do want to see us on the YouTubes, because Julie's going to show us hers and I'm going to show you mine.
That's it. Well, my one is one that I've adopted as a concept that drives my life, and that's CANI, C-A-N-I. C for constant, A for and, N for never ending, and I for improvement, CANI. And it all comes from the brilliant Tony Robbins, the self-awareness, motivational, empowerment, magnificence guru from the US. And he derives that CANI from Kaizen. Kaizen is a Japanese term which means change for good. And so this constant and never-ending improvement journey that we're all on, it does have a concept called Kaizen as well. But with CANI, when I started being really intrigued by that concept, and you think, everyone wants to improve, don't they? Doesn't it make sense?
Yeah, it depends what you're into, I guess.
I look back to when I was, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, look at old emails, old posts on Facebook, and you think, God, thank God I improved. Like, I'm quite embarrassing upon reflection. And so we do embrace the concept of constant never-ending improvement consciously in our brains, but quite often, very commonly, we actually resist the steps that it actually takes for constant and never-ending improvement. And I've identified 4 concepts that we must embrace in order to consistently improve in our lives. May I share those with you, Shannyn?
Absolutely. But before you do, I just thought it might be worthwhile really quickly talking about Kaizen, because people might be more familiar with this. If you're not a Tony Robbins fan club person, fangirl, Kaizen is actually from I think Toyota.
Kaizen, yeah.
Kaizen. Sorry, my Japanese
is. It's a production
line
my
English,
concept, isn't it?
It is. I think it's from the Toyota production line, and the whole idea was that if we can make improvements down the line, then it's going to make improvements down the end of the line. And so I think it was really, we could go into more detail, but it really does come from that car manufacturing concept of we're just constantly testing and measuring to improve our processes, to improve our outcomes, to improve our behaviours and things like that.
Nice. Thanks for the explainer. That's tremendous. Helps bring the context to what we're talking about. So the very first thing that I believe that we need to embrace in order to be on this constant and never-ending improvement journey is shifting the meaning that we attach to mistakes. Making mistakes are a part of learning, And indeed, Charles, my magnificent husband, talks about that there is no skill that any of us has learned that we have learned without making mistakes.
I want to disagree. I went from lying on my back to running. I did. There was no mistakes. I never fell over once. In fact, as an older person, I still don't fall over. I mean, I do
Only
a lot.
when she's drunk.
When I'm drunk. Only when the floor moves. That is normally in correlation with how much I've drunk. You're right. And I think the walking analogy is one of those good ones that remind us that if we had have given up on walking from the first moment we tried to get into the crawling position or when we first tried to stand up, then all of us would just be blobs on the ground. But actually, we were, as babies, you look at a baby and babies do not give up. They are like, I'm going to stand. I am doing this. And they keep trying and they keep trying and keep trying.
Yeah. And there is a lovely bit of video footage of a little girl and her father or her teacher or something, and she's wanting to go from 2 feet standing and jumping, both feet at the same time, jumping onto a block. And she fails and 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 then gets it. And, the look of achievement on her face. But you're right, kids naturally embrace the fact that I can't do it. It doesn't mean I can't do it forever. I just have to keep trying until I get there. And for some reason, whether it's the way we're parented or schooled or the way we function in workplaces, very quickly mistakes go from a pathway to learning to something you've got to try to avoid. And the meaning that we attach can make us feel bad or ashamed or regretful for even trying, because I shouldn't have even tried because, look, now I feel bad that I've made a mistake.
And the culture of the organisation that we're breeding can really set the context of whether we want to use mistakes as an opportunity for CANI, or we're going to shame it and we're going to actually create a environment where people are not going to own their mistakes. They're not going to take accountability for them because they know that they're going to get in trouble. It's kind of, again, going back to children. If I'm just thinking back to my childhood and on this. I'm hoping not. But I think if I recall my childhood, there were definitely times where I would not own up to things because the fear of the reprimand would be so great. And yet if there had have been a different way of looking at it, like let's learn from this, let's change the way that we as a family value honesty or what have you, then perhaps I would have been more honest as a child.
Maybe I would have been more honest as a child. That's right. So we do need to shift the meaning that we attach to mistakes, and so we are more readily embracing them and recognizing that without those mistakes, we're not going to learn anything new. We're not going to improve. And so shifting the meaning that we attach to it. So whenever we do make a mistake, say, you beauty, what's that going to teach me? Or you beauty, how much closer now am I towards mastering this thing, rather than, the mistake is something that I need to try to avoid. And indeed, Charles spoke about, the value of actually having a competition in your working organisation of rewarding the most valuable mistake. That because of that mistake, we've got a brand new system now, or we've really leapt forward in terms of our collective knowledge of how we're going to do things here, and actually reward the bad mistakes. We want to avoid, when we're talking about teams, mistakes born of bad attitude, that's for sure. But if those mistakes are being made in the trying, the learning of how to do things here, then that should really be rewarded.
There's some fun things that you can do as a leader, where part of your weekly stand-ups and things can be reflecting and celebrating mistakes from the perspective of how do we now change things? What are we going to do as a result of this? So being able to use that as a way of communicating to the entire team, this is what happened, here's what created that environment, here's what we can do instead. So if you're creating a CANI environment and embracing the mistakes, you can actually bring the team along for the ride, and that can actually help improve your culture overall.
For sure, because one of the drawbacks to having a bad culture around mistakes and bad beliefs within your organisation around mistakes is that things get hidden because nobody wants to be found out for doing the wrong thing. And so now you don't even see the stuff that's going on that requires a solution because everyone is being quite secret about those sort of things, which is certainly what you want to avoid as well.
Yes.
The second element is in order for us to continually improve in our lives is an eagerness to step into feelings that discomfort around incompetence. And so there's a competency grid where some people may be aware of and some people may not. And this competency grid goes through the 4 steps of learning. Grid number 1 is unconscious incompetence. That's where we have no idea what we're no good at. And the example that's often used when we're describing this grid is driving a car. When you're 6 years old, you have no aspirations to drive a car. You don't know what you're bad at. Ignorance is bliss. We're very comfortable in that space. We're just unaware. But then when we hit 16, 17 and we're sitting in the driver's seat for the first time and we are then becoming very aware, I don't know how much pressure to put on the brake, the accelerator. I don't know how to turn the wheel and look at the same time. There's so much I'm not aware of. There's so many things I have to get better at to feel confident. And that is called conscious incompetence. We're very aware of what we're not good at. And that section, that step of learning is one that a lot of people run screaming from, and the avoidance of that stops them from improving. We then move into conscious competence, where we are now competently moving through that new skill, such as driving a car, but we're still thinking very carefully about every step. We're very conscious, we're consciously competent. And the example I use is you wouldn't be able to have an intellectual conversation with somebody sitting in the back seat while you're in that space because you still are exerting a lot of energy and focus on the brake, the accelerator, the traffic, the everything else.
You've obviously not driven with me enough, Julie, because I can't have a conversation and drive. I just grunt at someone.
She's still been hovering in that conscious competence for a long time.
Long time. Pretty much it's my whole life.
Then eventually we can drive from point A to point B. We actually don't even recognize, we couldn't recall the journey itself because we're too busy thinking about our life and what we're going to do once we get to the location, and we become unconsciously competent. So we are so competent, it's now second nature, and we don't have to think about the specifics of getting that job done. So recognizing that conscious incompetence, the discomfort a lot of us feel around, I've got so much to learn, I'm feeling overwhelmed, I don't know if I've got a brain big enough to grasp onto these things. We avoid that, but embrace it instead. That is a very necessary step in learning. We all move through that step in learning, but be reassured it's a very temporary step because once we practice and repeat, we move from conscious incompetence through to conscious competence and beyond, and we're very comfortable with the rest of the grids. That one grid is the only one that we're really uncomfortable with, which leads me into the third aspect, which is the need for practice and repetition. So in order to go from conscious incompetence, from apprentice, from trainee to mastering anything, it is through our actual experience of getting the thing done and modifying how we do it. So practice and repeat with modifications is what is required to gain mastery in anything. And in working organisations, that step can often be missed by owners and managers because they are uncomfortable in extending out the time for practice and repetition and modification that many team members need in order to improve their skills.
I've actually seen more than once where there's frustration from a leader because there's a team member who's done something that's wrong in their eyes, and probably more often than not, they've delayed actually providing feedback to that behaviour. And once I've put enough pressure on around the pain of this behaviour continuing, they'll then manage that behaviour, but then they'll see it again and they'll be frustrated because they're like, I told them that I don't want them to do that behaviour, and yet they've just gone and done it again. And I think that we need to be aware that if someone is in that unconscious incompetence phase where they don't even realize that they're doing the behavior, then they'll continue to do the behavior. So as a leader, you need to continue to reinforce the message and to actually help them. And there's patience in that as well, because if we can understand and have empathy to understanding that everyone goes through these learning levels, they can't possibly go from unconscious incompetence through to unconscious competence. Like, no one goes through that. Again, the walking scenario. So I think that knowing that it can be helpful to breed patience as a leader, which I think is useful. I think that not being reactive as a leader is really important.
Yeah. And it's about making sure that your expectations are realistic. And when you start to understand, I'm now looking into what it takes to learn, I'm looking into the journey that my team members are going to be moving through, then that will start to alter your expectations, because ideally what we all want is to be able to say to somebody, do this way, and then they just do it magically, perfectly, the first time and then every time, and that's not realistic. So it is worthwhile as managers and business owners to investigate and contemplate what does it actually take to learn, and you do that really effectively by reflecting on yourself and think, what does it take for me to learn a brand new skill? And you recognise, gosh, there's frustration and resistance, it's all part of that as well, and there is that learning journey. Do we want to breed a culture within our organisation where people are less inclined to want to learn because there is so much resistance and angst around it? Or do we want to say, no, we embrace all the steps that it takes to learn, we provide great support throughout all of that, and as a result, learning is safe here and learning feels good here? Because going back to one of the things that Tony Robbins talks about, progress leads to happiness. People who are truly happy are achieving some kind of progress, whatever that looks like, in their life.
Yep.
And so we want to really foster that within our teams as well.
That's a really good point. I think that all of us could take a moment and go, where are those times where I've felt really rewarded in my journey of life? And it's normally when you're seeing progress, when you're experiencing positive change. And where are those times where I'm most frustrated is when I think, I'm just projecting all my own stuff, but, when I'm stuck and just doing the same thing and getting the same outcomes, that's when I feel most stuck. And it's the progress going to the next thing that actually helps me feel like I'm in control. I've got some sort of change that's happening in my environment. So I think that we can reflect and really notice that progress does breed happiness.
Beautiful, beautiful. The fourth and final step that I believe we must embrace in order to consistently improve beyond that constant and never-ending improvement journey is feedback. We can see areas obvious to our own eyes, areas to improve in because we're moving through our life. However, there's a whole series of other improvements that we could be making if we could identify them. They are hidden from us. We've spoken about the Johari window possibly in the past. This area that other people see could be improved within us to get better results, but we don't see it ourselves. And so it's hidden from us. And feedback is the only pathway to find out areas of improvement that we're not yet aware of. Feedback traditionally is something that we do resist and we do try to avoid. In fact, it's difficult to deliver feedback and also to receive feedback. And so both parties are trying to avoid that whole conversation. Yeah. And my biggest lesson of how you can shift the meaning around feedback was Toastmasters. In Toastmasters, both Shannyn and I both were members of Toastmasters, two separate clubs. I'm sure your club was exactly the same. Within Toastmasters, very briefly, it's a public speaking group. It allows you to become much more comfortable presenting in front of people. And everything within a Toastmasters meeting, the 5 to 7 minute speeches, the ad hoc speeches, the meeting itself, the evaluators that evaluate the speeches, everything gets evaluated. Evaluation is in essence the feedback. And when you are a new Toastmaster, and somebody experienced gets up in front of you and delivers a speech and you've been allocated the role of evaluating it, a common scenario is that person standing up and saying, I really can't identify any areas of improvement for you. I just wish I could be as good as you. And that experienced speaker goes away from that feeling let down. Damn it, I have nothing to improve upon in preparation for my next presentation, my next speech. As people become very comfortable with feedback in the organisation, because it's done every single meeting on a routine basis, none of it's mean-spirited. It's always supported by ideas on how to improve in those particular areas. Other areas that you're doing very well in are also identified as well. And you become so comfortable with feedback that you start to seek it out, because it becomes a bit of a high when you are going from one speech to another, feedback delivered to you, you then have that modify the way you deliver the next speech. You feel that strong sense of progress, and that is so rewarding to feel that strong sense of progress that you start seeking out that feedback as a requirement to get better. You don't just accept it when it's delivered to you, but you're asking people, what else can I do? What else can I do? Was it the same experience you had in your group?
Oh, absolutely. And Toastmasters is set up on the concept of feedback. And Julie, I do love how you segue into our previous episode. So if you're curious about how to give and receive feedback, episode number 20, of us, How Good is Feedback is what it's titled. So check that one out. I think that's one of the premises of Toastmasters. And you're right, feedback is a gift. And I think that we forget that. We get so caught up in our own fears and insecurities that we forget that actually if it comes from a spirit of generosity, that it really is a gift. If we come from the place of, I want you to improve. I want you to have a better experience of life. And I think that by giving you this feedback, you will have a better experience. It really is a gift. So it's not something to be feared, and it can be done with generosity and with empathy and with love, which we don't always talk about management and leadership with love. But I think that if we come from the place of love and caring, then feedback can actually be something that's quite a great experience. And especially if we're setting up an organisation with some of the primary drivers are CANI, that in this organisation, we're always looking to improve on things. So feedback is just part of the narrative of our organisation. It's neither good nor bad. It's actually just part of what we do as a constant and never-ending improvement organisation.
I love that. It's a tool. It's a tool. And can you imagine, and I would not normally have, because I work with dental teams, and if I described the culture of growth, of constant never-ending improvement, and focus in on feedback, what I've just described that we experience in Toastmasters, I wouldn't have naturally thought that it was possible within dental teams. However, Toastmasters proved to me that it is indeed possible. And if everyone's in support of it, it's indeed easy to create and foster this kind of environment. Can you imagine a working environment where you've got team members asking each other, you overheard me deal with that difficult patient over the phone. Shannyn, how do you think I could have improved with that? And they're seeking out opportunities for improvement from each other all the time. Man, that's powerful.
Absolutely. There's other things that you can do, like really simple things. I often, if I have an agenda that I'm running to with a monthly sort of meeting, there's a evaluation at the end. How did we do? How was our preparation? How could we improve? And so even your daily stand-ups, you can get your team members to say, how was this meeting? What could we have done to improve it? Again, just reinforcing that we're all about looking to improve, to make progress in the organisation and as individuals.
Love it. Love it.
Love it. Love it.
So you have been researching something a little bit the same, a little bit different. Tell us more about that.
It's pretty much the same, and I guess the benefit of actually talking about the CANI in a different frame is that people learn things differently, and it just reinforces information, which again, we're just talking about these learning levels. So we're actually demonstrating these learning levels within this podcast. I don't know if our audience has picked up on that, but no, I've just pointed it out. So I was looking at simple behavioral models, and one that I came up with or came across was the ABC model of behavior. And it's pretty simple. And it is almost literally exactly what you've said, but just with different words. So this comes from B.F. Skinner. He was an American psychologist, behavioral psychologist, very smart. We don't need to go into all the details of what this is, but what ABC stands for is antecedents, behavior, and consequence. Antecedents basically means the preceding environmental cues. According to the dictionary, it's a thing that existed before or logically precedes another thing. So it's the thing before the thing. And what the benefit of that is in terms of what we're talking here is it's the thing that happened or the environment that preceded a behavior. B is behavior, so what happened, and then C is the consequence of the behavior. So if we think about a mistake scenario that we were talking about before, if our antecedents is an environment that fosters learning and development and open communication and acceptance around mistakes, then the behavior that they'll demonstrate if they've made a mistake will be that they'll communicate that the mistake happened. The consequence will be, as a leader, you want to be embracing the behavior that they communicate around their mistake. And then the consequence being, what do we do with this? How do we change this? That then creates a feedback loop back to the antecedents of that we accept mistakes as being part of this constant and never-ending improvement loop. If, however, our antecedents is not spoken about at all, or there's an unwritten ground rule that we don't accept mistakes, we are perfection, and we do not talk about the problems that we have, then when a mistake happens, the behavior will be we'll go underground, we'll cover it up, we won't use it as an opportunity to learn. And then the consequence will be that that behavior or that mistake is likely to keep occurring. The reason why I kind of like this ABC model, and if you look at the show notes, we'll point to just a diagram, really simple. But what it means is that if we understand values, behaviors, expectations as an antecedents, and we're communicating all of that as a leader and we're reinforcing all of that as a leader, then we drive acceptable behavior. And if we're seeing behavior that's not acceptable based on our organizational values and how we want people to turn up and play in the organization, then the consequence is, as a leader, we either need to hold people, we need to hold people accountable, or we want to reward people for good behavior. So with leadership, often I think that leaders forget that we set parameters of expectations, and that if we stop holding people accountable, if we don't actually have a consequence to behavior, then we reinforce the behavior. So when I'm talking to leaders and they've got consistent patterns of behaviors with their teams that are not in alignment with what we're trying to achieve as an organization, and I'll say, what do people believe about that behavior and how are you holding them accountable to it? They'll sort of look a little bit blank. I don't know. And so I think it's a good way of reminding us that we as leaders set the foundation and we reinforce the foundation, and the behavior is the bit in the middle that the people do, and we can affect that. So it's a pretty simple model, but I think it's useful to remind ourselves that if we've got team members who are in patterns of certain behaviors, it's our responsibility to set our expectation and holding people accountable.
Yeah, that's right. And I've always spoken about creating an environment for success. Create the environment that will help people to be successful, because creating the environment recognizes that there's the words that we say, the way we say them, the policies, what actually is being fostered in terms of the environment and the team culture, etc., making sure that we are providing the proper resources and support and encouragement, etc. Because I feel like unless we create the antecedents, create the environment for success, we are therefore, if we fail to do that, we are allowing an environment for potential failure.
Correct. Which is why think especially for new leaders, really spending time thinking about documenting down and being really clear on our expectations and our standards is very important. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've, as it turns out, as I've started to talk, I've got a bit of a tickle, and that's affecting my narrative. And I think we've covered off what we wanted to talk about anyway, Julie. I think this is a short and sharp one.
Luckily for your voice, we have covered it off already.
So I guess let's just do the rappity rap. Wiki. So today we talked about a couple of concepts, one which was CANI from Tony Robbins, constant and never-ending improvement, and Julie explained the 4 concepts related to CANI. And that was, Julie, give us a quick wrap up.
The concepts that I relate to CANI, so I can't blame these ones on Tony Robbins in case anyone disagrees.
This is the Julie methodology.
But shifting our belief around mistakes. Mistakes are necessary in terms of having to impart the pathway to learning. The requirement for us to embrace the discomfort around conscious incompetence. Recognising that we only improve through practice and repetition, modifying our steps all the way through, and the need for feedback and shifting the belief we have and the meaning that we attach to feedback, so we start seeking out and embracing it to be on that path of constant and never-ending improvement.
And then if we overlay that with a behavioural model of change where we're looking at an antecedent, and that is to say that constant and never-ending improvement is actually what this organisation believes in, and we embrace mistakes, and we know that there's going to be times where there's conscious incompetence, behaviour and consequence, and then providing feedback, which then goes back into that constant and never-ending improvement. So these are 2 models that if you put into the front or back of your brain can really help you lead more high-performing teams and actually just be a better leader.
And you become quickly, I'd imagine, an employer of choice. People love working in these kind of environments. We despise working in environments where there's blame and finger pointing and being made to feel bad because things didn't go smoothly. And so when this is one of those cultural concepts that you can just sing from the rooftops and really have your own team members out there saying, yeah, this is exactly what's going on here, and this is how much you achieve here, and this is how much I've grown by working in this organisation. And all of a sudden people want to be involved with that.
Sounds amazing.
Amazing.
I actually think before we finish up, it's worthwhile me saying, I think you fully embrace, certainly you as a human. I absolutely, and thinking about working in an environment, I absolutely adore working with you because you've got that mindset. So whenever I've stuffed up and made a mistake, you're like, no, it's beautiful, we're great, problems, we're all good. It makes this journey with you even more enjoyable. So you as a human are more enjoyable to be around, I think, when you embrace these concepts. So thank you, Julie.
Thanks. I feel good for the day. That's tremendous. Thank you for that. To you, baby, too. I mean, it's a two-way street. So thank you very much. You've never made me feel stupid for the many mistakes that I made. Well, thank you again for a fantastic episode, Shannyn.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, listeners. Remember to check out episode 20, which is How Good Is Feedback, if you haven't already heard it.
Time to embrace it. Thanks. See you next time. Bye.